All right, well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and I just want to give a special thanks to John Sanders for the Institute for Defense and Government Advancement for letting us participate in this conversation. We deeply appreciate the opportunity. Certainly wish we could be there and present with everyone present, but with the COVID realities and our challenge with the schedule, more than happy to provide some recorded comments. Before I begin talking about hypersonics, let me talk about the thing I'm proudest of, because it's the most important ingredient as we go forward in this competitive space, and that's our people. As Global Strike Command came into 2020 to think through the problem of COVID, I tell you, I could not be more proud of the Stryker Nation and how the team has handled this incredible crisis. The nuclear mission never faltered, and it took a great deal of leadership and vision. And I will tell you, from right to left, top to bottom of the entire organization, they were just brilliant, and I'm incredibly proud of them. As I said, the nuclear mission never faltered. We've kept great alert rates, and a lot of great thinking went into how we did that. Great leadership. What we've been able to do with our bomber task forces now have been a tremendous help. As I've talked to my counterparts in the Pacific and Europe and Central Asia, deep appreciation for that strategic significance and what we've done, not just to send the message to our would-be adversaries, but certainly to reassure our partners and allies. And if you heard the Secretary of Defense speak at AFA just recently, he highlighted the bomber task forces as the preeminent example of dynamic force employment. And he underscored what I thought was probably one of the more important points, is that even in COVID, we built readiness, and we're a more ready and focused team with that, and it's just a great testament to the people. And why I bring that up is to say that this team is very focused on the competitive environment that's in front of us. In fact, we've thought through the world we are in, and we, a few years ago, thought through our motto, and we've changed it, right? And it's Critari Will Mori, which in Latin means compete or die. And when I look at the team's performance through a very tough time, they've absolutely embraced that idea. And why I say that, of course, is that's why I think the chapter of hypersonics is a perfect fit for that competitive environment and where we're going. And it really is part of who we're going to be as Air Force Global Strike Command. We were recently talking to someone I'm proud to call a friend of the command, and that's Simon Sinek. Many of you know him as a great thinker, speaker, and author, and just great insights we've been able to get from him. But in his more recent work, he talks about the infinite game versus the finite game, and we are absolutely informed by that. Let me talk about that for a second. For our sports fans, pro sports or high school sports or college sports, whatever the case may be, those games are finite games, right? There's a certain number of players, there's rules, there's an agreement that at the end of the game, when certain conditions are met, there is a winner, there is a loser. Many times, if there's a tie, we have rules to break the tie so that there is a winner. The players are the only ones really in the game, and while you can have a crowd that contributes with noise, they actually don't participate directly in the game. And the idea is to win as many games as you can, and on you go. In an infinite game, there aren't the same crisp rules. There's not the same uniform players. People come and go from the game. They enter with different equities. They have different agendas, and at times they play for different stakes and by different rules. And it's really an important reality for us as we think about the 2020 timeframe and on. There aren't really as many agreed to rules. Now, we think that there are some, but there's those in the game who want to write different rules, and that's our challenge. A finite player tries to beat their competitor by having certain conditions set. In a finite game, it becomes one of where the will to compete or the resources are gone, and that player now has to step out of the competition, but that doesn't mean they're completely gone. Infinite players understand that this is a long-term reality. They play the game differently. They anticipate the rules changing. They anticipate the environment changing. And one of the points I like that he makes is that you never win in global politics. You might win an argument or a case or a treaty or some kind of disagreement, but in the end, it goes on and on and on. And it doesn't really have the ending that the finite game does. When we think about business, there are businesses who have done great over the years, but you don't win per se business. You can win deals, you can be successful for a period of time, but if the environment continues to change, you need to change with it to remain in business, which is the game, not winning that deal for the short term. So it takes a longer perspective. It takes a lot different thinking about how we do that. And I think quite clearly we are in an infinite game. And we have turned our time and energy from counterterrorism and dealing with violent extremist organizations as our primary focus. Now those are still there and we need to contend with them. But now we're in an infinite game with two near-peer realist players with nuclear arsenals. We've always, since the Korean conflict, started conflict on our own terms, but we've never fought a nuclear armed adversary. And that reality is setting in as we think through the 2020 reality, and I'll talk a little bit more about the triad and what that means. But if you don't take a very different competitive, fully burdened mindset about competition, then I don't think you understand the game. And I certainly believe the hypersonic chapter is a very important chapter in that competitive space. So we're working on the more relevant recent dimensions of hypersonics. And so my point I would make to you is that hypersonics aren't new to the United States Air Force or to the United States military. An ICBM is by definition a hypersonic weapon. It just happens to have a fairly known source, a fairly understood delivery platform, and things are really in the broader sense governed by treaties and transparency. We play that game by a fairly scripted set of rules that are stabilizing. In the 50s and 60s, B-52s were dropping X-15 hypersonic airplanes and jet rocket-powered aircraft. And so we've done this before. We have not seen, however, until now, a need to actually weaponize that technology. So certainly it's time. It's time as we watch China and Russia doing that very thing that we're entertaining in a more robust fashion. The challenge with our would-be adversaries is what they're doing is a hypersonic weapon with different parameters, different performance characteristics, different profiles, and certainly where we need to contend with that is to make sure that we can answer that particular capability. We can't allow for, in that competitive space, for there to be an advantage where we might be put on the horns of a dilemma. And I think increasing our investments here, and you'll see it's not just a hypersonic weapon, I think that's important. There's a broader perspective that has to go behind that. Certainly what can we do with hypersonic weapons is an important question. And why would we go down that path? Certainly I'm a bomber pilot. I'm a big fan of standoff. I'm also a big fan of stand-in with stealth. But the ability to add a hypersonic, solution to a long-range strike sortie, it's the perfect alignment. We can do some very interesting things with hypersonics. I do believe that perhaps there's an opportunity for us in certain scenarios, and I wouldn't say it's a very wide-ranging set of scenarios, to be able to hold certain strategic targets at risk that give us an off-ramp, perhaps, in a conflict. When you have two state actors with these kinds of arsenals at our disposal, certainly as we compete for spheres of influence, our sphere of influence as the United States is free democracy, freedom of navigation, freedom of access to the commons, be there air, space, cyber, maritime. That has to be how things operate, and we think that's the best path forward. Not everybody agrees with us. But if we have the ability to hold something at risk that could begin to signal our intent to go down a different path, then I think that's something that's very helpful. Certainly when we consider anti-access area denial, and when I think of anti-access area denial with our would-be adversaries, it is a means to make us pay an unreasonably high price in time, energy, and resources to achieve an objective at a lower level, and it just puts those things, out of balance, and inherently is meant to deter us. Hypersonic weapons have the ability to begin to dismantle some of those architectures in a way that's very effective, and we think if we really are to continue in a competitive path and to manage escalation, the ability to dismantle some of those pieces is a very important capability we need to pursue. Hypersonics also allow us to be very responsive. We may see in the battle space some fleeting strategic target, a time-sensitive capability, and if we've done it correctly, then we can hold that particular fleeting opportunity at risk that we otherwise might not be able to based on the speed. And how we do that, of course, and I'll come back to it, is by connecting this into the air battle management or the advanced battle management system operating under a JADC2, a joint all-domain command and control concept. And so more on that later. So what are we doing in this area in Global Strike Command? It's part of course, the broader Air Force efforts. What we're talking about here, we have been talking about the hypersonic conventional strike weapon, what many would call the hacksaw, and the air-launched rapid response weapon, what we call ARROW. And, there's competing funding priorities here, and we decided to make, a decision to go down a certain path. There was good progress being made, but when we did the critical design review this year, we had to make the decision about what was our best option. Let me just be really clear, and I'll just leverage a quote from Dr. Roper, who is a great compatriot of this organization, and someone I enjoy talking to about how to move forward in the future. He said the reason we went with ARROW was not that hacksaw was bad. I think that's an important point. But ARROW is smaller, and we can carry twice as many on the B-52, and it's possible it could be on the F-15. So consider that we could put this on a fighter aircraft. It's in the class to be able to fit on the centerline station. So we have greater opportunities to apply that weapon, and we think the technology is pretty mature. So for us, the ARROW is really the priority for us. And then the second is, of course, on the Hawk. So the ARROW, we're really pushing the art of the possible. I think many of you already know a lot about this, but we're working with DARPA, on the TAC Boost glide technology and what that gets us, and it's focused on design, test, and production and readiness, and to facilitate the better prototypes being fielded. We also have a MOA with DARPA on a cruise missile concept, which we think is very important, which gives us, that air-breathing threat, that scramjet technology that lets us have an even smaller weapon with greater range, a different profile. And when I consider where a cruise missile of that capability and that caliber and what we can do to put that on other aircraft, I think that is incredibly powerful, and the opportunities there are fantastic. So we want to be clearly part of that conversation in Global Strike Command. So I'm sure there's some lingering questions out there, and since this is a pre-recorded event, I'm just going to try to do a little bit of the Q&A actively here as we go, and I'll try to put a few things to rest. Certainly there's a lingering question out there about whether or not we do a nuclear version of this. And before I do that, I want to step back and say there's a more important conversation that needs to be revisited and make sure that it's in the forefront of our thinking, and that is, of course, the triad that we have today. A very old set of systems being modernized. Well, I'm very proud to say that the programs inside the Air Force, the bomber, the cruise missile, the ICBM, where we're going with the gravity weapon and the new bomber, all those things, the new ICBM, those programs are doing incredibly well. And I'm very pleased. And of course, I knock on a lot of wood these days just to make sure all that stays on track. It is 2020, so You never know what's going to happen. So, but I am very pleased with the move to that newer arsenal. And as we watch the recapitalization of all three legs of the triad, we have to be very focused on what matters here. And when I think of the triad, there's been a lot of thinkers here that have thought about the triad. I think one of the brightest military minds of our generation is Secretary General Mattis. And he came in thinking you could go to something less, but his thoughts were, after really turning it over, is that he can't really solve the deterrent question reducing from a triad because of the interrelated capabilities. But I think more importantly, we should keep in mind a couple of key ideas. The context of the triad is not something we can just pick. The context of our triad is actually given to us, and it matters greatly. The context of our current triad modernization lives inside of a rapidly modernizing and building Chinese triad. You've heard comments about the attempt to at least double the number of nuclear weapons inside the Chinese triad. You heard double. I want you to hear at least, because those are the troubling trends. It is in the context of a fully modernized Russian triad with some extra bells and whistles as they go down some interesting paths. But they're complete with their modernization with a great number of nuclear weapons that are not part of a treaty. It absolutely, and this is probably one of the most important points for us to continue to really focus on if we really are interested in global stability, our triad lives in the minds of our partners and allies. There are many out there who believe that the extended deterrence reality is an incredibly important dimension of our triad. And any conversation about our triad, whether we like it or not, actually has to go through those capitals of people who have to make decisions every day to pursue their own nuclear capabilities or not, and what best serves as a visible expression of extended deterrence. Certain legs of our triad, and I say in particular the bomber, has an incredibly important contribution to that conversation because it's visible, it's real, it's tangible, and it's something they can see. I believe that's a really important part. So as we walk down the path of where we go, our triad lives in the context of our partners and allies, and it has to be done, I think, in a very transparent fashion. If you don't have the triad, I've also make the point that you don't have the same power projection capabilities. You have some different operational realities, and you create some, I think, regrettable opportunities for would-be adversaries by changing the game in a way that probably makes their problems easier rather than more difficult. So I think our triad is incredibly capable. It's incredibly, I think, well proven. I believe it is the cornerstone of the security structure of the free world. And if those things are true, and I do believe they are, then I don't see a need to enter into that conversation with a nuclear hypersonic weapon in a different fashion. Could we be driven there? That's another debate. But for here now, 2020, what I look at, I do not see a need to go down a different path. I do believe, however, firmly believe, that there has to be a very solid capability in the conventional hypersonic portfolio for our Air Force, both in the Aero and in the cruise missile. A few other lingering questions. Okay, so what aircrafts will employ hypersonic weapons? And I go, well, any of them that can do it effectively and efficiently, of course. And certainly, as airmen, we always figure out incredibly innovative ways to leverage this advantage. Hypersonics is just yet another dimension of that. And if you ask me what's a great answer, well, of course that absolutely has to be considered in light of a bomber and how we get after that. I do want to make mention here, though, that if you really are serious about hypersonics, you have to be very serious about the Advanced Battle Management System and the Joint All-Domain Command and Control concept. Let me just park on that for just a second and tell you why that's important. The Advanced Battle Management System is a collection of things that help us do this. This is moving data. This is connecting sensors and shooters, making decisions at machine speed, and enabling the most important resource, which is our people, to make incredibly good decisions. the nature of this fight, if you go back to some things that the chief has said recently, this is a really important set of concerns, is this new way of warfare, because we've lost some advantage in that conventional capability, we have to leverage everything we have incredibly well. And so that's to be able to move at speed, right? So you've heard of dogfighting. I would make the case that really we're talking about data fighting. And if you can move data from sensors and shooters and then connect that as the front end of a kill chain that ends with a hypersonic weapon, now I think you're actually talking about what you need to. And then you have to be able to do this to give yourself a decided advantage over your adversaries, and you've got to find a way to make the absolute best of the joint force. So the advanced battle management system is that collection of clouds, of data, of sensors, of machine learning, the algorithms, the command nodes that help do these kinds of things. And then joint all-domain command and control is the concept around which we will then begin to connect all of our partners and allies where possible, but certainly our joint force to be able to do the very best we can, not just simply to synchronize, but to truly integrate, to have advantage. If you really understand those two concepts, then you can see the natural extension of that is a hypersonic weapon. In this case, a conventional one. Some of the things we've learned here that I would just further underscore is, when we talked about the bomber task forces and what we can do with them with the dynamic force employment, the simple observation I would make is if I really don't have the same access basing and overflight concerns. So for instance, I can get to the Pacific very rapidly. I can get to places very rapidly in avenues of approach that my adversaries cannot anticipate. If I'm fixed to a geographic site, then there's a liability both in getting there, access, and making all those arrangements in time when the adversary knows that that's a strategic advantage he does not want you to have. And so when I think about the ability to go anywhere I need to go and to go there rapidly with hypersonic weapons, I think certainly what we can do as the bomber force is incredibly valuable. Let me just start to wrap this up and just to kind of recap where my mind is. The pandemic, this global crisis we've had, has really helped us galvanize who we are as a command and to really truly focus on the competitive environment. You expect us to do this mission set under all conditions, and with any of the threats and the challenges that are out there. And I will tell you, the command rose to the occasion in just great fashion. And we think about now, it just really underscores this infinite game that we're in, this infinite game where it's really about survival of your state, the preservation of your partners and allies, and the structure that lets us operate as we think we should operate. But it is with players who are playing the game differently with different agendas. And they know full well that there is a military competition. And so as we think through all the options available, what we can't afford to do is create a gap in our capability that lets someone dictate the terms in an unfavorable fashion. And so what we've done really is to really think through the bomber task force and how we apply that, and how we would bring Aero and hypersonic cruise missile into the conversation, and it absolutely is underwritten by ABMS and JADC2. And I'm very pleased with the command's effort to go and do the prototyping and experimentation in the air battle management system. We've had some very good success in these recent on-ramps, but I think this team has really got the right focus, and I'm very proud of them. So I just want to say thank you for having this conference, and thank you for your time and energy. Good luck to each and every one of you.